Hi YouTube, I hope you enjoy the video. If you do enjoy the video, please leave a like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my new content. Starting off with this, what do we do about the homeless video from PragerU? Should be very interesting and enlightening.
What do we do about the homeless? This is one of the most vexing public policy problems we face. If you live in a big city, especially on the West Coast, you literally face it every day. And every day it seems to get worse. Why? Let's start.
I mean, just kind of like immediately he asks why, and the answer is really simple. And it has a lot to do with capitalism and the way that it extracts wealth from the working class, as well as the way our economy is very coercive that leads to people doing things that are bad for your community and that lead to adjunct poverty across your community in an effort to gain capital. Like, pretty simple. Like, those are really the two primary causes. And everything kind of leads back to that. If there wasn't the incentive to make the working class poor, people wouldn't be homeless because they would be taken care of. Why? Because they are labor. That labor is useful. Those people have skills. So if we actually lived in a society that was based on your skill and based on how hard you work, these people would actually be very useful to society. But instead, since they don't have capital and they don't have money, they just get fucked over.
With a couple
But
facts.
let's see what he says.
First, the word itself is misleading. Homelessness is not primarily a housing problem, it's a human problem. The primary drivers of homelessness are drug addiction and mental illness. According
But let's think about where those things come from. Let's start with drugs. Like, drugs come into our communities for people who are looking to make money. These drugs are not only used for people who, let's say, own or operate cartels or gangs and stuff like that to make them money, but also it is used to make people like private prison owners a lot of money, because as long as drugs are getting into the United States and as long as drugs are on the streets here, we will always have a massive prison population, which is being used for things like free labor. Recently, I think it was in California, they're having to struggle with finding firefighters to fight fires because they've run out of inmate fire crews that don't get paid. Like, it's insane that we just allow slavery to keep happening. And one of the biggest drivers of that is the drugs in our community. And that's also part of the reason why homelessness is looked down upon, I guess, in the sense that, like, a lot of cities try to like get rid of the homeless population, but instead of doing things that would help these people get back on their feet and be able to gain stable housing, they instead just jail them so that they keep their prison populations up, so that they can keep getting more money, so they can keep getting more money from the lobbyists as well. Like, it all just really comes back down to that. And then what else did he say? Mental illness. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the problems with mental illness today and what the way that we treat it is, again, we treat it like a criminal issue most of the time. Like, police are sent to deal with people who are having mental crises when they don't have the abilities, training, any of the tools able to help these people deal with the situation that they're having. And instead they tend to react bad. Again, these people tend to just go straight back into our prison population, not because of that they're like doing crime necessarily, but it's because we as a society have decided that it's just not an issue worth dealing with, which really sucks. A lot of it also kind of comes down to is like the way mental illness is treated, in the sense that people don't look at it like a medical issue. It's more of like a feelings issue or like a get over it type of deal, when in reality it's no different than a broken bone. Like, you wouldn't tell somebody to just get over it if they broke their bone or broke their leg. Like, you wouldn't just be like, oh, get up, you're fine. You're just feeling sad.
According to data from UCLA's California Policy Lab, approximately three-quarters of people living in cars, tents, and on the streets suffer from serious mental illness, drug addiction, or both. Second, despite these conditions, the homeless actually make rational decisions about where they want to live. Not surprisingly, they move to the most permissive environment they can find. Make your city attractive for the homeless, and they'll beat a path to your doorway. The Venice Boulevard underpass on the border of Los Angeles and Culver City brings.
See, like I see what you're saying, right, Peyton? And I think most of it, what it has to do with, isn't necessarily like them not having any training, but that's not like what their primary job function is. So instead of sending somebody who's like a cop, right, and who may have like some base level of training because you're going to deal with people who are having traumatic crises and stuff like that, and you just have to be able to deal with those people. Instead, you can go for people who are like social workers, which have things like psychology degrees. And again, like these kinds of degrees and stuff and this kind of training is very, very popular these days. And there are a lot of these people who aren't able to find jobs. So what they could do is they could be hired on by like city governments or county governments to bolster their city's ability to deal with people having mental health crises. And I think especially in cities like with larger homeless populations, that would be a really good idea for like Los Angeles to have a relatively sizable group of social workers that are just ready to help these people move forward with their lives and maybe just deal with like the very crisis level events, not necessarily even like deal with them and help them all the way from like you're having a crisis to when they're in their home and stable. But I'm saying like a group of people that are specifically meant to help people with like the base level crisis situations that like you would have typically called the police for. And sometimes like these situations are kind of hard to tell the difference because especially like a lot of police officers like will tend to look at people who instead of seeing somebody having like a mental health crisis, they'll see somebody on drugs, right? So the line gets kind of blurry and it's difficult, but every situation's different, but having these resources available to people would be really helpful.
Home this point. It's one of thousands of concrete structures in Los Angeles County.
So what he's talking about here is how like when cities actually do things to cater and help homeless people, more homeless people show up, which is one of the reasons why a lot of city governments are hesitant to do things to help their current homeless population. Because the second other homeless people hear that, oh, Milwaukee has a bunch of really nice centers for us to sleep in and stuff, they look at this as being a huge issue. When in reality, what it could be is showing that these necessities are required in more than just a select few places. Instead of all the homeless people having to flock to very specific cities to meet their current needs because there's nowhere else for them to meet those needs. And in order to meet these needs, they have to have certain resources available to them. And if typically, if you're homeless, you don't have these resources available to you just anywhere. So you have to go somewhere where these resources are publicly provided. And when these resources are publicly provided, it can become a hot commodity for those who need these resources. It's kind of like why highways get really busy because, well, it's a public service that everyone can use that's really useful to a lot of people. So imagine you live in a massive city where you only have one highway and there's only one highway that goes through the middle. Everyone's going to flock to that highway. It's a similar situation. You're going to have a much bigger issue in this one specific area. But the second you actually start building more and getting these resources more readily available and removing the benefits, or excuse me, removing like the greed elements that are behind getting these resources to people and the profit motives that are used to motivate people to produce these resources, if we are able to eliminate those things, at least to a certain degree, these resources would become infinitely more available. So then every city would have access to these things, not just large hubs that are very left leaning. So then cities like LA, who have been pioneering these technologies, not only can do things to help these other cities build these things up, but that will also then relieve the homeless population in their city concurrently, as well as helping more homeless people get stabilized homes and getting jobs and things like that with these resources. So, like, yeah, he's bringing up a good point, but it's just looking at it at a super surface level.
But there's a curious detail. The Los Angeles side is full of tents, and the Culver City side is empty. Why? Because the two cities have different public policies. Los Angeles has effectively decriminalized public camping and drug consumption, while Culver City enforces the law.
Again, like, enforces the law. If a city has something decriminalized and it's not the law. Secondly, if we are going to look at issues like homelessness and drug addiction like they're criminals, then these issues will never be fixed. You don't go to jail and come out with a job. You don't come out of jail with a job or a home, or you don't come out of jail with your addictions fixed. All you come out of jail with is a lot of issues that come from our punitive justice system, as well as the issues that you went in with. And in most cases, they're worse. There are a lot of instances of prisoners coming out of jail and finding out that they don't have a home anymore, they don't have a place to stay, and that's why things like recidivism rates are so high. These people have no other choice but to go back to jail. They don't have a place to stay most of the time. Again, like, he's framing this like it's a criminal issue, but it's a social welfare and health issue. These these are real human people that we shouldn't just punish for the times that they deal, or the struggles that they deal with. It's ridiculous.
This pattern that the homeless go where the policy environment is the most permissive can be seen up and down the West Coast. In San Francisco County, it's estimated that 30% of the homeless migrated there after becoming homeless somewhere else. In the
But think about this. Imagine if all those people were in their place and they had a place to sleep, they had food, they had shelter, they had their needs met at least to a basic degree, then they wouldn't all be moving to San Francisco. And also, one of the other issues with this is housing. He said it's not a housing issue, but it partially is, because things like rent and real estate prices are extraordinarily high right now, and per, a big reason for that is that landlords are buying up all the property that they can possibly find in an effort to make a profit off of it. So instead of one person buying one house and paying the $100 that is the rent or whatever, right? Instead, you now have somebody who bought 30 houses that cost him $30 a month or $100 a month for all of them, but he's charging these people 150. All right, well, now he wants more money. Now he's charging them 200. Again, these things are big, big, big causes of homelessness, as well as I believe it was, I think it was San Francisco. It has a homeless population that is lower than the empty houses like number. Like, they have more empty residential units than they do homeless people. Like, it's a very easy problem for them to fix. They have the resources. It's right there. But instead of it being government owned or up for sale at its actual normal price, they're all purchased by landlords who want to rent them to rich people because they can make a much higher profit margin every single month from these rich, wealthy people who move to California than they ever could going to lowering their rent and renting to people who may be on things like government assistance.
city of Seattle, that number is 51%. The San Francisco Chronicle estimates that hundreds of homeless individuals move to the Bay Area each year because of the perception that it is a sanctuary for people who are unwilling to participate in programs designed to get them off and keep them off a life in the streets. At first glance, this would seem to make no sense. Why would an individual with no shelter or stable source of income move to one of the most expensive cities in the country? But in the
Okay, I thought he was going to go somewhere else with that. That's why I kept going. He he kind of just contradicted himself because he's talking about these resources and the friendliness to homelessness being a big driving force to homeless people coming to your cities, but then said they don't use the resources to get back up on their feet. Why else are they going? Like, I get that there are other reasons, but like that that was part of what you stated.
world of the homeless, it makes perfect sense. That's because they operate under a different set of incentives than the average citizen. In a research survey of homeless migrants in Seattle, 15% said they came to access homeless services, 10% came for legal marijuana, and 16% were transients who were traveling or visiting when they decided to set up camp. But this dramatically understates the biggest draw of all: the de facto legalization of street camping, drug consumption, and property crime. As former Seattle Public Safety Advisor Scott Lindsay has shown,
If it's a crime, it's not legal.
the city is now home to a large population of homeless, prolific offenders, people who commit property crimes to feed their addictions, but are rarely held accountable for those crimes.
He's making it so easy. Like, right here, this is what causes this, right? You have crime in an area because there are people with drug addictions. How do you fix this? Clearly, this doesn't work. This has never worked. We have to try something else. And we know from clinical studies, from research and statistics from other countries, that decriminalizing drugs and getting these people into rehabilitation centers instead of prisons actually reduces the amount of drug use. It actually reduces the amount of harm that comes to these communities from the use of drugs within them. It's so easy. Like, the answer is right there, but they just don't want to see it because this makes them more money.
By the criminal justice system. So, is ever increasing homelessness our inevitable future? If our goal is to make life as attractive as possible for the homeless, the answer is yes. If our goal is to actually help the homeless, the answer is no. Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner is a Democrat, but his approach to homelessness is a world apart from his counterparts in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle. It is simply not acceptable for people to live on the streets. It is not good for them, and it is not good for the city, Turner has said.
That's a
Houston's
pretty reasonable
policy
thing
is a
to say.
perfect example of what Turner calls a tough love approach.
I don't
The
know about
city has
that.
built housing for the chronically homeless, formed a coalition of nonprofit partners, and lobbied the state government for more mental health and addiction services. At the same time, Turner has enforced a strict ban on public camping and promoted a citywide campaign to discourage citizens from giving money to panhandlers.
Yeah. Do you know what those things do and what is different about these policies than what he was praising earlier? It's not making it criminal to be homeless. It's not making it criminal to be addicted to drugs. Yeah, obviously these places don't have decriminalized drugs, but the point is that lobbying the government for facilities for rehab clearly is going to do a ton more to help homeless people than just throwing them in jail and cracking down on homelessness.
The results are as instructive as they are stunning. Over the past 8 years, Houston has reduced its homeless population by 54%, while it has skyrocketed in West Coast cities. Different policies, different results. Where a Seattle politician opposes hosing down feces covered sidewalks because hoses are racist, Houston fights in the courts for the right to clean up encampments. Where California progressives push for more drug injection sites and have decriminalized thefts under $950, Houston imposes consequences not only for theft, but for aggressive panhandling, window washing, and other street obstructions.
So, again, like, homelessness is a symptom of a problem, not an identity, and not a problem. Like, it is a problem in of itself, but it's not something that is just caused on its own. And one of the other symptoms of problems that could cause homelessness are going to be higher rates of criminality. But conflating the two as people who are homeless commit crimes is an absolute BS way to go about this, because all it does is stigmatizes homeless people. It makes people who are significantly more fortunate in our society look down upon homeless people. And it also makes it otherizes them to where we no longer think of them as being part of our population. It's the same reason that Republicans use the rhetoric that they do about immigrants from other countries. It's to otherize them, it's to make them not sound human. Like, they obviously aren't going to say, like, they aren't human literally, but they are going to do things to insinuate that. They are going to point out things that we might look at societally as being weird in their culture, or different things like that. It's used to make these people look like they are a part of our group, so we feel more comfortable with them pushing policies that are clearly past the bounds of reasonability and clearly harmful to these groups.
As this Texas city has demonstrated, local leaders in cities of any size can meaningfully reduce homelessness through a strategy that mixes compassion with common sense enforcement, allowing public encampments and open drug consumption, and start prosecuting property crimes. They will have much more success redirecting.
Again, what does prosecuting property crimes do to stop homelessness? Absolutely nothing. And there's no way he'd be able to back that up. If I asked him this question, he would sit there for an hour and think about it, or just have to lie to my face, because there is no answer. It doesn't. Like, point blank, period.
The homeless away from a life of self destruction and toward a life of hope through mental health treatment, drug rehab, and job training. That's what.
But you were just talking about, again, you were just talking about how the people who commit these property crimes are doing it to fuel their drug addictions, and how you want to prosecute those people. They have drug addictions and get prosecuted. What's going to happen? They're just going to go to jail. And then they're going to come back out, probably still addicted to drugs, because drugs get into prisons, or like they're just personal behavior doesn't change, or they get sobering up from their drugs and then they go back straight to the same environment they were in, because they didn't have any substantive changes in their life aside from having to spend months away from it. And now they're just right back into the same pattern, and they're probably going to fall back into the exact same habits. Like, he's offering zero real solutions.
What we all want, isn't it? So why don't we do it? I'm Christopher Rufo, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute
Why don't
for
we do it, he says. But yeah, that last video, it was very interesting. Like I said, homelessness isn't and isn't and shouldn't be a crime. Um, these people are people who need assistance in most cases. It's very difficult in our society to come back from that, because of the way that our society is built and how it incentivizes just having money already.